Okay guys, welcome back to the channel. And as you can see, we've gone straight to the video of what we're going to be doing. This is going to be part one. Many of you guys requested if I could do a complete engine rebuild series doing this Porsche engine, which is my Porsche 997. A lot of it is similar to what you're going to see on the 996s. The reason I'm going to do this series is purely because, obviously, as many of you guys know, there's not enough information out there regarding rebuilding these engines. I know a lot of you are very interested in this whole process. When you even search up on YouTube, there's a lot of engine rebuilds, but they're in fast forwards, a lot of them with music over it. Nothing really explaining it, it's just very full detailed videos. Obviously there is a few out there, but obviously there's none that are gonna do what I'm gonna do, where I'll explain it all in detail. Obviously a lot of them were new when they started building the engine, so they missed out a lot of things, to which I've learned over the course of waiting to rebuild this. And obviously people I've spoken to who do this day in, day out, they've told me what to do, which has been missed. So a lot of other people don't end up making the same mistakes that they see online. So that's what we're going to be doing in this whole series. So today we're going to be replacing the main bearings, and we're also going to be using the new ARP bolts for the crankcase carrier. I'm replacing the main bearings purely because it gives the new owner peace of mind. Now, many people always say, if they're not keeping it, it's not worth doing it. But bear in mind, I had a certain budget for this car to spend on it when I began building this car, which was 17,000. I haven't stepped that just yet, but I'm coming close to it. Now, with that in mind, I thought it was best to do the main bearings. And the reason I want to document all this also is for the new owner to see what we've done. Because as many of you guys know, a lot of people can say they've done it, but unless obviously you show that you've done it, people wouldn't believe it's actually been done. So we are going to go ahead and remove all these main bearings. Now to remove them is very simple. You just want to press down with your thumb and take them out. And if you can see there, these are average wear marks on them. You know, they're not highly scored. They haven't cut into the crankshaft. My crankshaft is fine. It hasn't had to be reworked. So therefore we can just get these out, put the new ones in. Do the same on this side. And that's what we're going to do. Now be careful, because you've got your oil squirters sitting here in the holes. The oil squirters sit here. If you tip it over, they will fall out, which we're not taking them out. We're not even changing them because we don't need to. We're just taking all the old main bearings out. And it's very, very simple. And just like that, you can see they're all coming out. Some of them won't, but if they don't, you can use a pick just like that, and prise them out. And we'll just take that one out as well. You can see how easy it is to come out. Now they're out, we're just going to take out the other side. So again, you just get your pick and just lift them up so they all come out, because obviously we're replacing every single one. Now, they do have upgraded components, which I'll speak about in a second when I show you the new main bearings I got. And I'll explain to you in detail what a lot of you guys do miss on what you need to know. Now, if you can see, that's all the main bearings out. Now, if you can see here, these are the original Porsche main bearings. Now, many of you will believe that you'll be able to just go and buy main bearings from your local Porsche dealer. That's simply not the case. The reason for that is, if you have to have your crankshaft reworked, you will have to make sure you get a different clearance bearing. Now, they do make them, as you'll see, Design 911 have them on their website from Westwood. They have all different clearances. You also need a plastic gauge, and you'll have to torque your carrier bolts all differently as well, based on what the plastic gauge is saying, because the clearance is going to be different if your crankshaft has had to be reworked. Now, bearing in mind mine haven't been reworked, I can get away with using the factory main bearings. But if you've had to have yours reworked, if you had a spun bearing or it's cut through, you won't be able to use these, or you won't be able to use the normal common rod bearings either. Now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take these out the packet. You can see they're all wrapped up like this. Now to put them in, it's very simple. They sit in the grooves here. It's not hard at all to get them in. But what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be lubing them up, because as many of you guys know, you can't just stick the main bearings in there, because when you go to start the engine for the first time, unless it's properly lubricated, the bearing, it's just going to wear the whole coating off the bearing straight away, and also probably cut through. So we're going to give it a proper lubricant. The one I'm going to be using is this, which is Graphogen. Now this is not cheap by any means. This works out about £35 just for this small tube. It's very, very expensive, but it's really good stuff. Now, I was recommended this. Most engine builders will recommend this. Anybody that knows how to build an engine will know about Graphogen. Most people can use Lucas assembly oil, you can use your own assembly oil. I'm choosing to use Graphogen purely because it's something I know. I've spoke to many people and they've told me, trust me to use this, so I do trust them. They've done this before and that's why I'm simply recommending this to you guys. I will link it in the description down below for you guys to go and purchase it. All we're gonna do here is I'm just gonna get a bit off out the tube, just like that. You don't need much and you just need to rub it all on the bearing, just like that. And you've got to remember, it doesn't matter where it goes. It's just to help lubricate the crankshaft and to lubricate the bearings when the engine first starts up until the oil circulates and gets all around the engine. Now, you know, many people seem to believe you've got to put them underneath the bearing. You don't have to at all. The underneath is based on the oil squirters to deal with, not for you. And if you can see here, we're just pushing them in. And just like that's the first main bearing in. Now we're gonna go and repeat that step across the whole crankshaft. We're just gonna be putting all the main bearings in. And obviously I'm not gonna long off this video showing you how to do this, so I will forward this part because it's very, very simple. You just got to be careful and make sure they're properly in. What you don't want is to end up having a spun bearing. So just lubricate all your bearings, always at the top, and then you just want to locate them in to place and then push them in. Just like that. That's all you do, guys. And it gets easier as you go along doing it. Obviously, bear in mind the new bearings are new, so they're not worn like the others. We're just lubricating all the bearings properly, making sure they're all in their spot before we click them in, just like that. And you can't not properly seat them. There's only one way you can put them, so they will seat correctly. It doesn't matter how much of this Graphogen stuff you get all over either. All it acts is as an assembly lube, so therefore you ain't gonna do anything to the engine, ain't gonna harm it in any way. I know many of you guys are seeing it everywhere, but it will not do anything to the engine. Just pop that in, just like that. And the one thing you do want to make sure you are doing is working in a very clean environment, because if you are not and anything gets into this crankcase carrier while you've got it open, I think many of you guys know what's going to end up happening. You can end up destroying the engine and you were back down here rebuilding it again. You just make sure after that all your bearings are in properly. And it does get very messy, especially when you're using the Graphogen. That's why I said a lot of people do choose to use assembly oil to assemble their bearings, but I'm choosing to use this Graphogen because it's what I've been told to use, especially for building this kind of engine. So we'll just lube that one up, stick this one in. Make sure they're all in line before you seat them. And just like that, they go in perfectly. And that's one half of the crankcase done. So now we'll move on to the next side. Okay guys, so now what we're going to go ahead and do is install these thrust bearings, and if you can see I've already Graphogened them as well for protection. We're just going to install them here. These are magnetic, so they just literally stick on right here. You have to be careful when you put on the crankshaft to make sure that obviously they don't come off and they stay on. And obviously when you put on the top of the carrier, so that way they don't come off. These are there to protect the crankshaft, and they're now on. They are magnetic, so you shouldn't have no issues putting them on. They're now on properly, and that's why I said to make sure obviously everything's correct before you put your crankshaft back on and redo all the bolts. Now luckily I've got ARP ones, so if I thought something wasn't right, I could remove them and reuse them. But many of you guys are going to use the Porsche ones, which, as many of you guys know, are torque to yield. They're turned at a certain degree and they cannot be reused. So do make sure everything's correct for you guys before you reassemble everything. Now all I'm doing here is just going around, make sure the graphogen, all the main bearings are in properly. Just push down, make sure everything's in before I reassemble everything, which everything is in. Everything's not moving. We've got a thrust bearing that just popped off, which is to be expected. I'm touching the middle one. All of them are fine. Just check this side as well. They're all in. If you feel the gaps ain't right, you can redo the gaps of the main bearings, but just make sure they're all seated correctly and there's no movement in any of them before you re-put anything back in. And that's it, guys. Now what we're going to go ahead and do is get the crankshaft so I can guide the crankshaft back into the case. So this is the bottom half, and you'll see if I just turn this around, I'll show you how you know the bottom half. This is the bottom half right here because you've got that guide, and that's for the tensioner, and you've also got a bolt line here. So this is the bottom half of the crankcase carrier, and I'll show you which way the crankshaft goes round. So the crankshaft goes this way round, just like that, and it goes that way round with this piece facing outwards. So you can see this piece is where the chain comes, the tensioner comes up here, and the chain sits on the crankshaft here. Now we're going to put the top piece of the casing on top, and you do have alignment dowels for the case, so make sure you go the correct way. So go something just like that. Now to align it with its dowels, you're going to tap on it, just like that. Just like that. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn the case towards you guys. So now you guys can see the case. You have to tap it down. Make sure you use a rubber or plastic mallet. To do that, don't use a big heavy iron hammer to hit the crankcase carrier down. Now what I'm going to go ahead and do is install the bolts. Now if you'll see here, we're going to be using these ARP crankcase carrier bolts. Now this is the instructions to what to torque them up to, which I'll tell you guys in a minute because there's no information regarding that. And you can see these are the ARP crankcase carrier bolts. These are reusable. We've got the fastener assembly, which we've got to put on all the bolts before we install them into the crankcase carrier. So we've got everything in there in this box. In here, this is what they tell you to torque them up to, which nobody seems to explain to anybody, even if they do try to use ARP bolts. You can see that's the torque sequence. You can see here they're meant to be torqued up to 50 foot-pounds, but they want you to follow the manufacturer's recommended torque sequence, tighten the bolts in 3 equal steps. So for these bolts, because they go straight to foot-pounds and not a degree, you would torque them at 20, 30, and then 50 foot-pounds, and that's the direction you want to go in. Now what we're going to start off with is torquing them to 20 foot-pounds. Now I do have a digital torque wrench which was sent to me months ago and I've never got around to using it. We're going to torque up all these bolts to 20 foot-pounds, then 30, and then 50, and we'll follow this guide to guide us what way in a crisscross pattern to torque them all up. But we're going to run them down by hand and then we'll torque them up. So these are the ARP bolts I'm going to be using. I'm just going to open this fastener lube just to help us. I'm going to put some onto the bolt here, which we don't need that much. Need about that much on it. It's meant to be very runny. It's meant to be quite thick. There we go. Now it's coming out thick, so we'll just put that on a little bit. Put it onto the threads. This is normal for ARP to give you this, and we'll just put one in here. Start screwing it down. Now we'll get another one. Just do the same thing. Rub it on all the threads. Make sure it covers all the threads. It's like a grease or a lube. Now I did read you don't have to use ARP's ones. You can choose to use your own lube, which you guys saw I've got graphogen. I could have choose to use that, but as it come with it, safer a bit, be safe than sorry. So I just chose to use the ARP one, but ARP even say if you need more, you can use any other assembly lube. Doesn't really matter. So we'll just install that one as well. We'll just use that again. We'll just do this. We'll just do that to all of them. You guys get the drift. Many of you will know from rod bearings. If you've done any rod bearings, you'll know you have to use this stuff anyway. It's just the same thing. ARP give it everything, even the head bolts. You got to use this as well. I'm just going to screw them all in. So I'm going to do some to turn them down. As you can see here, I'm using a 10mm metric socket to turn these down. Just turn them down as far as they can go. And now all of them are done. What we're going to go ahead and do now is torque these up. Okay guys, so this is the torque wrench we're going to be using. This was sent to me by a company called Automotive Parts. I have been waiting to do the video regarding these. They wanted me to use them on video, and now the time has come. So yes, I do have this one, and also have another one that goes 2 to 24 Newton meters as well. They sent me this one months ago. I never got around to doing a video. Never used it. It's the first time I've ever been using a digital torque wrench. I don't even have to change it from Newton meters to, you know, something else. I know it does the angle degree. It does all torque up to 100 or 20 Newton meters. I'm not sure what else it does. You guys will have to bear with me while I sort it all. I think you've got to put it down to calibrate. I'm pretty sure, something like that. I'm not 100% sure how it works. It's the first time I've ever used one of these. I'm used to using old school torque wrenches, not a digital one, but I bought this to do the degrees, which realistically we're not even going to be doing because I've got all ARP bolts. So really I could use a normal torque wrench, but I'm going to use this, bearing in mind that, you know, it was sent to me. And I need to do a video of it, so we'll be using this all through the engine rebuild, and we'll be using the other one they sent me as well, which is a smaller one, 1/2 inch and a 1/4 inch, so we can torque up all the bolts. Okay guys, so what I've done is I've already torqued these to 20 foot-pounds, and now what I'm going to go ahead and do is go around and torque these to 30 foot-pounds before we then move on to 50 foot-pounds. Now what you want to do while torquing these ARP bolts is make sure you'll be turning your crankshaft. Now this isn't moving as of yet, but it should do after we've torqued down all the crank carrier bolts, which I'll show you in a second. We can turn it over, we can bolt it up and turn the crankshaft over once we flip it up, but we want to get these torqued down first and make sure that the crankshaft is spinning freely before we move on to the next stage. So what we will do now is we're going to torque them down to 30 foot-pounds, so I'm going to have to move the camera back a bit for the torque wrench to be able to turn when we torque them down. So we're going to go ahead and start from here. We're just going to torque them down to 30 foot-pounds. Just like that. And now we've got the next one, which we'll follow on the stages. And you want to make sure that your crankcase doesn't move either during this step, so that's why I'm holding on to it as I'm torquing them. We'll go to that one, torque it up, just like that. Then we'll go here, and we'll hold on to the crankshaft again, or we'll just turn this. Hold the crankshaft again. Go to 7 and 8, which is here. hold it while you torque it up. And again here. Just like that. There you want 9 and 10. And if you can see, this tries to move as you're torquing them up. We'll go here again. Go to 11 and 12. Just like that. And our final 2. And that's the 30 foot-pounds. Now what we're going to go ahead and do is we're now going to change this. So what we need to do is go into the settings here somehow. We'll set it, so we'll just change it over. Now we need to go to 50. Now that's set. Obviously we don't need the angles. So now we've got it set to 50 foot-pounds. We're just going to let them rest, the bolts, because when I let them rest they will stretch back up. And then we will torque them down again, because I did notice, as I just said, when I took them to 20, I took them again to 30, they did try and come back up a bit. That's why they tell you to torque them in 3 stages, for that reason. So we'll go ahead and torque them to 50, once I let them rest a bit, and then we'll torque the final stage. Now this step is very important to make sure your crankshaft rotates. If it's binding up or it's catching or anything like that, don't go any further. I loosen all the bolts and re-torque them again, because you may have them too tight. Now if you can see, mine is spinning freely. If you can see there, it spins freely. I'm not having to put much force on it to spin it. We're going to see what they're like when we torque them up to 50 foot-pounds. If it's too much, we'll have to back them off to 40 until we find where the correct position is. As I said to you, it all varies, and if you've had to have your crankshaft reworked and have to use a newer, bigger clearance bearings, you will have to change the torque for your crankcase carrier. So do bear that in mind. Now we're going to go with the 50 foot-pounds, and we're just going to torque it up to 50 foot-pounds. So what we're going to do is move it. That's the first one. Now the second one, which I'm trying to hold the crankcase as I turn this. So now move on to the third one. Again, I'm going to hold the crankcase as I turn this. And then the fourth one. Now the same for this one. Just there. Same for this one. Now we need to do the same here. There as well. Now for 9 and 10. Then you want 11 and 12. So we need to torque them up. And then 13 and 14, which is right here. And you can see, now my crankshaft is spinning freely. It ain't binding up or anything like that. They're all torqued to 50 foot-pounds. And the crankshaft is moving perfectly in the new bearings. And that is absolutely perfect. And that, guys, is how you replace the main bearings and also replace the crankcase carrier bolts with the ARP ones. As I said, best case scenario for you guys, if you can afford it, is get the ARP crankcase carrier bolts. I know they're expensive, but they are so worth it, and also they are reusable. And as many of you guys know, a Porsche engine is always gonna have to be rebuilt. Having these will make your sale a lot easier if you ever come to sell your Porsche, because people know they don't have to pay out for bolts constantly, because as many of you guys know, talk to your bolts are annoying to have to buy. That is how you build the crankcase back up after tearing it down. So guys, as you see, I've now rebuilt the crankcase carrier for the Porsche 911. Now that's built up, the next video you'll be seeing, which is part 2, is putting the tensioner on, the IMS, the chain, everything else, and then reinstalling this back into the block. We'll be dropping this back into the block once we got all that on, and its new chains, all the new tensioners, everything else, all the chain guide rail, everything that needs to go on. And I'll be showing you how to install it into the block, how to put all the new O-rings everywhere, and everything else that he's doing before we pull it back into the block. We'll build it all up on the bench, stick it back in the block, put all the com rods on as well. On here, we need to do a lot to the crankcase carrier before we drop it back in. I'll show you all that on the next video. I hope you guys are going to look forward to all that. I did promise you guys I would build this engine up with all you guys, and we'll do the video going along showing you how to rebuild it. This is the first one, rebuilding the crankcase carrier. The next one's going to be com rods, chain guides, putting a new chain on, and then dropping this into the block and installing the pistons for bank 1, 2 and 3. And then we'll do bank 4, 5 and 6 on a later date. But you guys will get to see me install the new piston rings and everything else that we're going to be doing for this engine. So thanks very much for watching, guys, and I hope you guys are actually going to enjoy this Porsche 911 rebuild.